How we doing? My name is Ryan B. Hebert, sitting alongside Audie, commentating this next match between Animus and Pqlarbear. Audie, how we doing today?
You're doing great. We've saw two really intense sets in top eight, and now we're watching our third set of top eight. We see Animus, who of course very recently got top eight at North American Internets, and is using the team that Jonathan Evans used to get top four at Internets. And on the other side, we see Pqlarbear, who is using a really interesting team with Dawn Wings, Necrozma, Groudon, Coco, Amoonguss, and Stakataka.
I really like the redirection on Pqlarbear's team with that Amoonguss and the option for Trick Room with Stakataka and possibly that Dawn Wings Necrozma as well. But you just gotta respect the Mimikyu on Animus's team here, Audie.
Yeah, and so I played Animus in top 16, so I've seen what this team can do, and he of course bodied me. So it is a Trick Room Mimikyu, and so both teams having potentially having Trick Room modes while both teams operating out of Trick Room. It's gonna be really interesting to see what speed control these players opt to use.
And Adi, we're going to see Incineroar Coco from Animus and Kangaskhan Necrozma from Pqlarbear. That Intimidate ability coming out from that Incineroar. A powerful lead. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, and so this is once again, we don't know if Pqlarbear is using Ultra Necrozma or if he's using a slower Trick Room Dawnwings Necrozma. Either way, Incineroar will pressure it. However, Tapu Koko doesn't really pressure this Dawnwings Necrozma. It would pressure it if it turned into the Ultra Necrozma form.
Very true, because then it would then be weak to a possible Dazzling Gleam or even a Fairy Z move.
And of course, if it does choose to Ultra Burst, then it would be slightly less weak to Incineroar's Dark type coverage. Either way, Pqlarbear has the faster Fake Out on the field, so it really can choose which Pokemon gets to move on Animus' side of the field.
I'd be curious to see if he maybe waits to go for a Mega Evolution because there is a Mimikyu on Animus' side of the field. So keeping that Kangaskhan for later in the game, if he so choose to do so, would be really interesting with that scrappy ability. Being able to fake out ghost types. It'd be interesting if he decides to not Mega Evolve at first, but uh, maybe in this game one, it just isn't the thing to go for.
Right, and Mimikyu, of course, is threatened not only by this Kangaskhan Scrappy, but also by the fact that, well, by the strong Ghost type coverage from the Necrozma Dawnwings. And if Animus really has to decide, does he want to go with the Trick Room mode? Because that would be what Mimikyu is used for. We do see the Fake Out go into Tapu Koko, which is great for a U-turn into the Kangaskhan.
Curious to see what Animus wants to swap into here, and it's going to be that Primal Kyogre coming onto the field here, pivoting, and Trick Room coming out. As you mentioned before, Audie, we're going to be setting up for maybe a little bit of a slower game now. This gives us potential for Kangaskhan to swap out safely, to switch in a Primal Groudon to negate any sort of Water-type move and Harsh Sun.
Right, of course, Animus also has a Rayquaza in the back, so that switch might not be nearly as free as Pqlarbear would like it. However, that would require Animus to make a strong read. Tapu Koko really doesn't want to be on the field during Trick Room because of its high speed stat, to see whether it goes out into Incineroar or into something else.
You're completely right, Audie, and that's why you're here to point out those things to me. Rayquaza has just great pairing with this Kyogre here because as easy as it sounds to swap on a Primal Groudon, as you pointed out, a Rayquaza coming onto the field with its Airlock ability would negate the effects of Harsh Sun and allow Water-type moves to be used. But instead, we're actually going to see the Incineroar coming in and Intimidate coming out, and a Triple M going into that Incineroar, knocking it down 70%. And a Volt Switch coming up from that Tapu Koko. Can we just talk about the Helping Hand for a moment, though? It's not a common move on Mega Kangaskhan, but it's helpful. It's helpful, all right.
Yeah, and we see the Pqlarbear has, three Pokemon that can do a lot of damage in Trick Room between Groudon, Necrozma, and Stakataka. And so Kangaskhan seems being used as more of a support variant in this case with a fast fake out followed by helping hand to boost out the damage of the heavy hitters on Pqlarbear's side of the field. We saw a resisted Menacing Moonrays Maelstrom do around 70% to the Incineroar. That is an incredible damage output.
Yes, especially with that Helping Hand as well. It's not every day that you see an Incineroar taking that sort of damage from a Triple M like that, but he had to do it to him. He had to do it to him. But I have to reward Animus for being able to swap out his Kyogre like he did, taking advantage of that trick room, going for the U-turn with that slow Incineroar and swapping it out for something else. No, wait. No, wait. No, wait. No. Hard switching into Incineroar. Sorry. Hard switching the Primal Kyogre into Incineroar and then Volt switching with Tapu Koko. Apologies, I got confused.
And now he's put himself in an even better position to use a water type move because the Necrozma can't do as much damage because Kyogre likely underspeeds the Kangaskhan and because Incineroar can U-turn. And if Pqlarbear does opt to bring in the Groudon, he can bring in the Rayquaza that is potentially sitting in the back.
And here is that Rayquaza, just a protect coming out from that Dawnwings Necrozma and Water Spout being used by that Primal Kyogre and Kangaskhan going for that double edge, but really not doing much damage with -2 in attack. So that Incineroar switching in and out has really put a damper on the damage output of that Mega Kangaskhan.
And one benefit of the less attack is that Kangaskhan actually does survive to live another day. If it had a little more attack, the double-edged recoil would have knocked it out. I'm not sure if that's what Pqlarbear wanted, prefers having the Kangaskhan remain on the field.
But hey, it's working. It's working for it. And as we're kind of going through here, the tides have sort of turned a little bit. I gotta say, Adi, at first I was saying, oh, Polar Bear's really putting himself into a good position. But now that we're seeing Rayquaza and Kyogre on the field now, and Animus still has Incineroar and Coco in the back to deal with whatever's going to come out later on, I think this Kyogre maybe is in a position to swap out back into that Incineroar to preserve for later to be sure that if Polar Bear did bring that Primal Groudon, he has something to take care of it.
And for what it's worth, we do know that Animus is running a Swords Dance Berry Rayquaza, uh, which is an interesting set because it likely can take an attack from Necrozma, and if it wants to set up Swords Dance towards the end of Trick Room, it has that option as well. The other speed stats, how fast is Necrozma Dawnwings? We don't know. And how fast is this Kangaskhan and the Kyogre? Those all might come into play later in the game.
That is information I didn't know, Adi, but thank you for sharing it. Helping Hand going on to that Dawnwings Necrozma, Moongeist being targeted into that Kyogre, an Origin Pulse coming out, knocking out that Mega Kangaskhan, bringing down some damage onto that Dawnwings Necrozma, and that Rayquaza, as you mentioned before, going for a beautiful Swords Dance.
And then of course Pqlarbear brings in his Stakataka, which is an interesting choice because now Rayquaza, by using Swords Dance, it means it's opting not to have the ground coverage. And we actually see Pqlarbear switching the Amoonguss, which means he did not bring Groudon to this game.
Wow.
Animus brings in the Incineroar, and Stakataka goes for a substitute. Now we see Rayquaza go for a Dragon's Descent and bring Amoonguss down to its Focus Sash.
Focus Sash Amoonguss, you gotta love it. But on the other hand, too, not bringing that Groudon to deal with a team like this, it honestly makes a little bit of sense to me with the amount of pressure and the amount of threats that do exist on Animus's team to his Primal Groudon. The question is now, Trick Room is now done. This Rayquaza it's at 2 times attack. You get up a substitute. Okay, so we're gonna see Protect from Amoonguss. Protecting against the Dragon Ascent, and the Berry activating on Incineroar from that Flare Blitz recoil, and we do see the Trick Room getting up once again.
Yeah, and so normally when you see a substitute Stakataka, I believe it normally runs Rockium Z and tries to boost its attack stat with a Lonely Nature from Beast Boost. Of course, Rockium will likely kill Incineroar from here. We do see the extreme speed go into the Amoonguss, and we see a Rock Slide, which does a lot of damage to the Incineroar and very little damage to the Rayquaza thanks to its the strong winds.
Mm-hmm. And what's nice is as long as this next Rock Slide does not miss on Incineroar, Dawnwings will be free to get off some big damage into that Rayquaza as well. But can it do enough into Rayquaza to knock it out, especially? And Strong Wings, if it were to use some type of other move that might be super effective.
Right. One thing that's worth noting is that Necrozma Dawnwings at minimum speed actually does underspeed normal speed Incineroar with no speed investment. However, a lot of Incineroar are opting for a sassy nature or running fewer speed IVs in order to get a slower U-turn. So once again, the unknowns about the speed stats of these Pokemon could very well come into play here.
Setting up that Trick Room really is helping Pqlarbear here. My question is once the Rayquaza is knocked out, what is your next step when dealing with a Primal Kyogre? Especially in this Trick Room, Will Polar Bear be able to apply enough pressure to knock out Primal Kyogre when the time comes?
Well,
We'll
the
find out.
Primal Kyogre is down to under 10% health. So it should be able
Well,
to be knocked out by a rock slide at this point. And we do see the Kyogre coming in. Rayquaza protect the Kyogre is going down to a rock slide. However, that also means that Delta Stream is no longer on the field. And we do see the attack boost on Sakataka when it gets the Beast Boost for knocking out a Pokemon, which means it is a lonely nature with 17 defense IVs.
oh my, oh my. Taking down Mons one by one here on Animus' side of the field. Joe UX9, game one. Is this still going? Christ. Yes, Joe, it still is.
Yeah, and so now we're going to see the Incineroar comes in, gets the Intimidate on the Stakataka, applies Fake Out pressure to that Stakataka, which is really the biggest threat on the field. But really, his goal is to just get out of Trick Room and survive the last two Trick Room turns. How he does that.
Coco going to be swapping onto the field here, swapping out that Mega Rayquaza, Fake Out going into that Stakataka, and Dawnwings is going to be unleashing a powerful Moongeist into Tapu Koko.
And doing about 50% to Tapu Koko, leaving it with a little bit of health left. And of course, now we see the last turn of Trick Room is coming up. And yeah, and Polar Bear is still exerting a lot of offensive pressure, but can he do enough before Trick Room ends?
That's going to be the main thing. I'm not exactly sure. At least we have the strong winds to reduce the amount of damage that Rock Slide does, and we do see the knockout on Incineroar. And now this is going to be the big moment here, Audie.
Yeah, and what's really interesting about that is that Necrozma undersped or is slower than the Incineroar, so it's faster in Trick Room. So we see Tapu Koko and Rayquaza, both really fast Pokemon against two relatively slow Pokemon. See Tapu Koko go for an Electro Web, and the Dragon Descent into the stack attack.
But it won't be enough. It won't be enough. Disappointing, but it has the defense like no one other. No other Pokemon has the defense of Stakataka. Well, I'm sure there are, but you get the point. Moongeist Beam coming out from Dawnwings Necrozma, sealing up that first game for Polar Bear. 12 turns. Took a while. They didn't put the timer on for a little bit, but Adi, as we're getting into this game two here, let's just talk about this, shall we?
Yeah, that was a really entertaining game. We saw some very interesting movesets from Pqlarbear. The Necrozma Dawnwing is normally being used to Ultra Burst, but in this case, just being used as a slower Pokemon and actually undersped the Incineroar. Pqlarbear's entire team seems to be slower than Animus's entire team. And so in Trick Room, Pqlarbear managed to put a lot of pressure up. However, Animus, if going into game two, I think that if he can prevent Trick Room from going up or stall out the Trick Room, in a really good position. And on top of that, the Stakataka put in so much work, threatening a lot of his Pokemon, and of course, taking attacks from this Rayquaza that doesn't have any ground coverage. And it looks like Animus's best way to deal with that is either potentially his Metagross, which he didn't bring. So it's going to be really interesting to see whether or not Animus can preserve his threats to Stakataka until the late game when he really needs them.
Mm-hmm. Turn one, Animus ignored that Dawnwings to Necrozma and instead decided to go for a U-turn with Incineroar. And I'm curious what the Dark type move of choice is on that Incineroar. If the Incineroar has a Dark type move, which most do, I'd be interested to see how Animus is able to pivot with his Incineroar in this upcoming game to see if he can use it to his advantage. Because he did a little bit with Intimidate spam onto Polar Bear Stakataka, trying to fight against the Beast Boost with every knockout that Stakataka would try to take. But I think you're right. I think trying to use this Metagross, if it has probably Stomping Tantrum would be its ground type move of choice. It would be interesting to see him in this next game.
So now we see that Animus leads with Incineroar and Tapu Koko, and Pqlarbear leads with Kangaskhan and Necrozma Dawnwings once again.
Yeah, both players, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You know what I mean? Both players going with the same leads here. Kangaskhan having that pressure with Fake Out. The main thing is there a way to prevent a Trick Room? My only thought would be, well, this Incineroar could have Roar. It could have Roar, but with the presence of U-turn, it makes me think that it might not, because that fourth move slot usually is given to Roar if you're not running U-turn. But in this instance, we're just going to have to see, will Trick Room get up in this first turn? Can Animus prevent it? Let's find out.
Right, and last game, Pqlarbear fake outed the Tapu Koko, not the Incineroar. Same thing, fakes out the Tapu Koko, and the Incineroar goes straight for a crunch into the Necrozma
Ooh,
wings, but thanks to its Prism armor, it does take that and manage to set up Trick Room.
that is not a move you see every day on Incineroar. Crunch. Crunch,
Uh,
crunch, crunch.
it's an interesting choice because I think the damaging moves that people decide between are Darkest Lariat, Crunch, and Throat Chop. Throat
Yes.
Chop, of course, stops Snarl and Roar, except Animus doesn't have a lot of reasons to be scared of Snarl or Roar. Uh, and Crunch doing less damage than Darkest Lariat, but Darkest Lariat ignores the Rayquaza's defense drops, which is why a lot of people are opting for Crunch instead.
And right away, we're seeing Animus preserving that Incineroar for later in the game. Stack Attacka being switched in here for that Kangaskhan, and the Protect coming out from Dawnwings, protecting against Tapu Koko Volt Switch.
And Pqlarbear, of course, realizing after last game, Stack Attacka is put so much pressure on the field once it gets on there, and brings it in right away. Hard switches Kangaskhan out, and now is staring down a board state of Tapu Koko and Rayquaza, both of which can do very little damage to Stack Attacka, and Stack Attacka can do a lot of damage back.
Adi, did you mention what the item might be on that Stack Attacka on Pqlarbear's side of the field?
When the substitute Stack Attacka that I have seen before tend to be Rockium, and it does
Okay.
have Rock Slide, but we have not seen that yet.
Okay, great. Great, great, great. And Incineroar coming back out here, going for that Intimidate onto Stack Attack. Rock Slide coming out, doing a hefty amount of damage. Oh, a timeout from Pqlarbear, taking a little bit too long to think about his choices here. The beauty of Pokemon and the beauty of a timer. Volt Switch coming out from Coco. Coco going to be swapping out into the Primal Kyogre. Did Pqlarbear bring the Groudon in this set, or did he bring the Amoonguss once again? Let's find out.
And so I wonder if that Moongeist Beam, if it had targeted the Tapu Koko, would have KO'd, because that is around the amount of damage that it did in the last game. We do see Pqlarbear bring in the Kangaskhan. However, this time Kangaskhan has the slower fake out than Incineroar because Trick Room is up. About breaking the Stack Attack substitute and OHKOing the Kangaskhan, the Amoonguss, and forfeits.
And wow, you just see there that Pqlarbear had the beauty in the first game of the timer not being on initially, and so players were reminding them to go and do that, because this is a game where you need to think on your toes. And Pqlarbear saying in chat, this is why we don't have other players impose timer upon matches. Controversial statement, I have to say, because if this was being played on the cartridge, you would have a timer. I don't know. What's your take, Adi?
Uh, as for timer on Showdown, I think that if one player wants it, I think it's fine. We didn't set any rules about timer entering this tournament, and so I think that if one player wants to have timer, I think that it's okay. One thing to note is that when you're playing on cart, you do have a lot more time to think, just because the animations take a lot longer, and so that might be one thing that Pqlarbear is a little upset about. It's either way here.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's no need to. Just it's always a thing that comes up every once in a while, whether or not to have the timer on. But moving on to this third battle, we saw how quickly the tides turned there in that last set, just by timing out and not having the selected moves that you wanted to go. And what am I trying to say here, Adi? Trying to put the right moves into the right slot. Let's put it that way. And we saw how quickly the tides turn, and once again, Pqlarbear bringing the same four Pokemon as before, trying to do the same thing, and potentially maybe it would have worked if he had not timed out, but we'll never know. And it looks like we're going to see Kyogre, Incineroar versus Kangaskhan Stack Attacka.
Yeah, these two switching it up a little bit. They both decided that their fake outs were too important to not lead with. However, Stack Attacka being led into a Kyogre this time, and it just goes straight back out into the Dawn Wings, knowing that it's not very safe. We just see a fake out coming into the Kyogre and a fake out going into the Necrozma Dawn Wings, which of course does not have any effect.
No, it will not have any effect at all due to its ghost typing and fake out's normal typing. Saves Save Stack Attacker from any sort of chip damage, and fake out from that Mega Kangaskhan going into that Kyogre. No Trick Room set up yet, so this is unusual. It's turn 1. Now going into turn 2, we don't see a Trick Room. Probably going to be seeing something like that in this next turn, but the thing is that Kyogre and Incineroar together between Crunch and an Origin Pulse, it would have done way too much damage. And yeah, so we're going to see that double target with the Origin Pulse hitting both Pokemon and the Crunch going into a protected Dawnwings Necrozma.
Right, and so Necrozma very smartly protecting, trying to avoid getting knocked out, so that it can potentially set up Trick Room this turn. Now the question is, now Kangaskhan has the ability to potentially knock out this Kyogre with another double edge, and we saw last game that Crunch does not do enough to knock out Necrozma Dawnwing. So Pqlarbear at the potentially expensive Kangaskhan might be able to set up Trick Room this turn.
And we're going to see the Protect from that Kyogre, Crunch coming out from that Incineroar, and Trick Room being set up by Pqlarbear. Ooh, we're in a situation now, folks. We're in a situation now. Pqlarbear getting the Trick Room that he so desperately needs to be able to bring in that Stack Attacka and essentially sweep the game.
Yeah, and of course the Protect on Kyogre. We saw that Kyogre was slower than the Kangaskhan. We know that the Necrozma Dawnwings is actually now the fastest thing on the field because has the slowest speed stat. But both Pokemon are threatened heavily by the Incineroar, and both Pokemon can't really do a ton back to this Incineroar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this Incineroar being in a mighty fine spot, but we're going to see Kyogre switching out and Rayquaza coming onto the field. Amoonguss switching out for that Mega Kangaskhan, and we do see the Triple M going into the Rayquaza, and it will be enough to knock out Crunch going into Necrozma Dawnwings, and wow, big knockouts taken on both sides of the field.
Yeah, so both players lose their potentially strongest restricted. We do see the menacing Moonraze Manstrom go around what is a Berry Rayquaza, which has a little bulk invested. And we see Stack Attacker come in and the Tapu Koko come in from Animus side of the field.
Nothing like redirection and the slowest Pokemon, possible on the field right now, to be up against a Tapu Koko and an Incineroar. Amoonguss obviously not appreciating the fact that if this Incineroar does have a fire type move, it will threaten a little bit, but at the same time, Rock Slide or even a possible Rocky MZ, as you mentioned before, is going to do big damage into an opposing Incineroar or Tapu Koko.
Right, and so the question is once again, can Animus do enough to knock out the Stack Attacker, which puts a ton of pressure on the field? And of course, can he move? Because we do see a Rock Slide has a chance to flinch the Stack Attacker there, which I think we saw last game as well. So the U-turn goes into the Amoonguss switching out, and the Tapu Koko doesn't get a chance to flinch. Likely going for a Volt Twist to bring the Incineroar back in, but it will not get that opportunity.
It certainly will not. And now Amoonguss Stack Attack on the field. Spore is not an option due to electric terrain, but at this point in time, the Stack Attack I think, is just free to keep unleashing powerful Rock Slides. And Amoonguss, if it has some sort of attack, to probably go into that Kyogre to best protect its partner Stack Attacka.
Yeah, and so now once again the question is, can the Amoonguss and Stack Attack do enough damage to the Kyogre? Because once the Kyogre goes down, there really aren't a ton of ways for Animus to knock out the stack. Incineroar can come in to do a little bit of less damage, and it does come in for this Tapu Koko. We just see a Protect onto Kyogre, but we see a substitute come out working around that conservative play from Animus and give Stack Attack a turn, a way to take a little bit of damage.
A way to take a little bit of damage, a way to take a lot of damage, Adi. It's now allowing Pqlarbear to have an extra turn to say, okay, I'm putting a little bit of space between my Stack Attacka and the opposing Kyogre. And now that Heavy Rain is set up too, this Amoonguss is not threatened by any sort of fire type move. So Pqlarbear is actually loving this weather condition from his opponent right now as well.
And Animus might have wanted to fake out that Stack Attacka so it wouldn't be able to attack, but now it cannot fake out the Stack Attacka thanks to a substitute. So this substitute putting in a lot of work. We do see the fake out go into the Amoonguss and a Rock Slide. Once again, we play the Does It Flinch game where the Amoonguss flinches, but the Kyogre does not, gets the Origin Pulse off, and the substitute from Stack Attacka. Now Trick Room expires, and Pqlarbear has the two slowest Pokemon on the field.
Two slowest Pokemon on the field, Kangaskhan in the back, but only with a little smidgen of HP. And Pqlarbear saying that he has misclicked GG's. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And so Stack Attacker, of course, normally carry wide guard, but in this case, it's used substitute instead. And so it doesn't really have a way to get around Origin Pulse. Of course, Origin Pulse does only have an 85% accuracy, so he's definitely not out of the game quite yet. But uh, and we do see actually the Stack Attacker switch out the Amoonguss Protect, and Kangaskhan goes down to an Origin Pulse as the Incineroar goes for a Crunch, trying to knock out the Amoonguss.
Some raised tensions between both players here in chat, going back and forth just for a moment, but the game is never over till it's over, Adi. And so the Kyogre still has to connect its Origin Pulses with Stack Attack as well as Amoonguss. But at this point, the Kyogre does have a good chance of being able to knock out these two Pokemon on the other side of the field. But again, it's never over till it's over.
Yeah. And so I expect to see the Trick Room, and the Origin Pulse does actually just hit the Stack Attacker, and now it's just the Amoonguss, which goes down to a Crunch. And so Animus will take game 3 and move on to the top 4 of the Mount Silver Invitational.
Yes. Yes, well played by both players. Let's just take a moment here before we go off to kind of talk about these teams. Pqlarbear not bringing his Groudon at all, as you pointed out before we even started this set. A combination of Mega Rayquaza, even basic Rayquaza, next to a Primal Kyogre is enough where Groudon is threatened. So he just never brought it.
Yeah, and if you look at Kyle's team, Animus's team, it has its own Trick Room mode, so it's very adept at playing in Trick Room. And so Pqlarbear potentially surprised Animus a little bit with the Trick Room in game 1, but once Kyle adapted by conserving his Kyogre properly and rotating his Incineroar in and out, Pqlarbear really just didn't have the damage output with the Stack Attacker, which was the key. And as you can see, Animus won game 3 with all of his Pokemon at very low health, but he managed to stall out the Trick Room turns and get enough damage off.
Stack Attack is showing how much of a superstar that it can really truly be, especially this Stack Attack with substitute and the ability, to use its Beast Boost to raise its attack again and again and again. We never really got to see Pqlarbear abuse that too much, due to the fact that Animus was able to position his Pokemon so well where nothing ever actually really fainted. The only thing to be fainted, especially in this game 3, was that Rayquaza switch into the Z move from that Dunwings and Krasma.
Yeah. And so with that was our third set of our top 8, and we will be right back with the fourth and final set of our top 8.